Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at Agile KRC. So welcome to today's webinar where Keith Richards is going to talk to us about how to measure Agile success. The slides from today's webinar will be available from our website. Go to agilekrc.com, then click on the Resources tab. Whilst you're in the resources area, you might want to look around at other areas of interest. So you can search by subject matter. You can find today's slides under the subject area of governance. You can also find subject areas such as Prince2, DSDM, Scrum, estimation, just to name a few. And you can search by the type of resource you're looking for as well. For example, PowerPoint slides, videos, white papers. You can find all of our webinars on our YouTube channel as well. Just search for Agile KRC. I'm shortly going to pass you over to Keith, but just a couple of things before I do. If you want to tweet about our webinar, please use the hashtag METEN, that's M-E-T-E-N. You'll see this in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. I believe this is a Dutch word, and Keith will explain the significance during the webinar. If you'd like to hear more from Keith about this subject and much more, you can check out his blog at agilekrc.com/blog. I'd just like to point out a couple of features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using the software. So if you look at the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow. Click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel. And if you'd like to ask a question, just type your question into the question box and Keith will take as many as he can at the end. We also type up the unanswered questions from the webinar, and you can find these in the resources section of the website also. If you're watching this live, you should be able to see Keith's webcam. You've got control of how big or small you want to make this on your screen. Just click and drag the double lines till you're happy with how it looks. I'm afraid you won't be able to see Keith if you're watching the recording. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome back everyone. Great to have you all again. The numbers keep going up every time we do this, so that's very, very nice. Just a quick name check for some of the countries around the world that are joining us today. We've got everyone from Australia, Brazil, India, and South Africa, Ireland, a couple of unusual ones, Kuwait, so hello there to you, whoever you are over in Kuwait. And we've got someone from Houston as well over in the States, so hopefully we can help you with some of your problems during the presentation. So we're going to have a look at how you measure Agile success. It's a slightly different webinar to how we've done previously because a lot of this is going to be food for thought. To get you to think about what you can do at your own organisation, because a lot of this is quite difficult. As those that are used to it, we start with the results from the entrance poll, and the question we asked you when you registered for this webinar was, do you have clearly defined success criteria for your Agile transition? Now, I've been doing this for a couple of decades now and spent a lot of time going into organisations and explaining about success criteria and what it is. And certainly a lot of our customers have had to bite this bullet quite hard because it's quite difficult. But the results that are coming in are actually quite surprising. Normally I know what to expect a little bit, but the results here are quite amazing. And when I say amazing, it is in terms of the number of people who've said yes to that question, namely they have clearly defined success criteria, is actually 8%. So that's less than 1 in 10 have actually got success criteria, and it's vital that you have clearly defined success criteria, as I'll explain during this webinar. Now, in terms of the other categories, in terms of outright no, that was 21% actually said no, we got nothing. The other two categories that you could have picked there were not really, not much, or somewhat partially, and they made up 21 and 36%. And without trying to hit you too hard with numbers, what this is saying to me, that either none or not much, we're talking 78% of people, and this is not a good place to be, and I'll explain why later on. Now, some said none of the above because it might not have been that clear a question in certain contexts. But let's get going and see if we can help everybody there. And well done to the 8% there. Who that's quite a good place to be. So let's have a little look about what we're doing with the presentation. Just some intros. Why do we need to do this? We're going to talk about two different views, and this is one of the big learning points I want you to take from the webinar, what I call the sort of upstairs, downstairs view of measuring Agile success. What needs to be measured, how to do it, and such like. And just to let you know what success for me on this presentation will be is if I can get all the way to the end without my PowerPoint crashing, because at KRC we've just upgraded all our systems and we're having some teething trouble. So let's see how we get on with that. And if we do, we'll be agile and we'll work through it and make sure we hit the deadline. Intros. Claire mentioned some things there. I'm the Chief Executive, Managing Director of Agile KRC. We've been doing this for a long time, but it's any sort of agile anywhere is what we do. We coach it, we train it, we deliver it. Recently, I've been the lead author for the new Prince 2 Agile product, which the previous webinar was on about, and as you can see from various things there, that's who I am, that's where I'm coming from. So I'll let you, if you want to know more about that, go back to that slide, because I want to get straight on with what we're actually talking about here with the webinar. Now, in terms of Agile, in terms of what we're trying to do here, firstly, it's definitely good for you. Everybody's doing it, everybody's having successes, it's going mainstream, people like it, there's lots of information available about it, the web's full of it, there's lots of surveys everywhere saying how we've saved 20%, saved 50%. But the one problem with the surveys is often they're asked, what do you think your saving is? So people say, well, I think I've saved 20%, or I've reduced defects by 50%. But often that's very much an instinct and a subjective question. It'll be difficult to know if you've actually really got specific data that you can actually prove that. Now, one example that I would give as an analogy here, and it's very important, in order to explain the point, it's important to understand how difficult this is, and I think the analogy of fitness or being healthy is quite a good example. So in the UK, there's a huge campaign in the UK to make sure that you eat, 5 fruit and veg a day, because it's good for you, it's bound to be good for you, it's surely going to work. But how do you actually measure that? What statistics are backing up that? Because a lot of people are doing it, a lot of advertising is based around it. I think I was talking to one person from the NHS, and they actually said that in truth, really, you should be eating 7 portions of fruit and vegetables per day. It's just they didn't think people could get that far ahead. So is it arbitrary? Is it obvious? Does it matter? This is what we're sort of going to look at in this webinar about Agile. So just bear in mind that sometimes, yeah, I know it's right, but how to quantify it is actually quite difficult. Because the bottom line is you've got to be able to prove this. I'll explain why later, but the important point is it's not good enough to just say, yeah, I'm sure it's helping, I know things are better, because as I say, you need to be able to prove this. Can we just use our instincts? I'm saying no. Is there any benefit to proving it works? Well, yes, there is, because you can justify your investment in it. If you don't really know whether it's working or not, you shouldn't really be spending any money on it. So you do need to be able to prove it. I saw something very interesting on the news over here in the UK. It was probably about three or four weeks ago, but it was talking about children, young children between 14 and 16, using games on sort of gaming devices like a Game Boy or whatever. So using these gaming devices, they did some surveys and found that 41% of the children using it didn't perform that well at school compared to those that didn't use it so much, and the figures were quite stark. 41, I've got the figures here. 41% of children using portable gaming devices, achieved a certain level of qualification in GCSEs, which we have in the UK, whereas 70% of those who used them less than once a week actually got the higher grades. It was a very, very big difference. But the trouble with the research is they couldn't work out why. And I know you might be thinking, well, it's obvious. Well, is it obvious? Because creating a link and the measure is actually quite difficult, because the same survey found that 81% of young people using social media found that it didn't affect exam performance. So if you're playing around with Twitter and Facebook, you know, on your iPhone, whatever, it doesn't seem to affect anything. Yeah, if you're playing with a gaming device, it does. So having to prove what you're doing, and in a sort of an agile context, let's imagine that you're having, I don't know, you're moving from 2-week sprints to 1-week sprints. You know, how do you prove that it's actually helping things? Take something like collaboration or the team working better. How do you know that it's actually making any difference further down the line? As I say, this is quite difficult. So how do we actually go about proving it? And the bottom line is it's actually quite hard work. You have to get measuring things, you have to know what you're looking at in order to prove whether your Agile's working. But you've got to be very careful. You can measure the wrong things, you can measure anything and it just seems to be going the right way, and so, you know, yes, it seems to be working. Now, I've trained quite a few times and been a consultant out in Holland quite a few times, and they've got a lovely expression out there which relates to the hashtag, and it's meten is weten. Now, apologies to any Dutch people on the webinar if that's not quite how it should be pronounced. It's my best effort. But meten is weten is a Dutch expression which means to measure is to know, or sort of measurement is knowledge. And therefore, you need to be able to measure things so you can apply your agile behaviors and decisions to it and see if it affects you know, the thing positively or negatively. Now, you could be discussing this in retrospectives or whatever, but, you know, measuring is knowledge. If you are not measuring the thing, then you're not in control of it. It's very easy to go wrong. There's a very well-known person in the Agile community called Tom DeMarco, and he's sort of came up with this rather brilliant expression, you can't control what you can't measure. And that's probably one of the most important things I'd like you to take from the webinar. If you haven't got any numbers and sliders and dials and percentages that are telling you Agile's working, then you're not in control of your Agile. So this is one of the key points of what I'm trying to get through in this webinar. Now, one of the most important things is you've got to then, if you're talking about succeeding and Agile success, one of the first things that you've got to bear in mind is what exactly is success. So there's many things that could be classed as success that you could be very happy with, and this will vary from organisation to organisation. You know, what are you trying to achieve? You know, what does good look like? Now, here's a really important point from today's webinar that I think a lot of people miss, and that is that Agile is actually only an enabler. It gets you to a better place. So there's no point saying, hey, we've now achieved fantastic Agile, we've done it, or making that the end point. It's a transitionary point. As I say, Agile is only an enabler. What are you trying to achieve with Agile? Now, this is how you measure success in the sort of what I call the big ticket item in the bigger picture. So what exactly are you trying to do? Are you trying to go faster, you deliver things and products and services more quickly? Are you trying to make the thing you deliver better? Or are you trying to be cheaper? So, you know, sort of more, better, faster, as some people sort of say in terms of a sort of general saying, you know, what is it you're actually trying to achieve? Because you've really got to start there. You've got to make out what exactly you're trying to do. Now, I'm sure quite a few of you listening to the webinar now are going, well, I want to do all three. Well, you've got a problem, because you can't do all three in the sense that they are going to compete with each other. There's a lovely saying that someone told me a long time ago about, I think it was in an ironmonger's store or a blacksmith, that you know, you can have it quick, you can have it cheap, you can have it well built, but you can only pick two of those, because they compete with each other. And this is why you've got to be very careful what exactly you want to achieve in your organisation or in your department. So let me give you an example. If you're an organisation and you're really annoyed with the defects going out to your customer, so if, let's say, it's IT and you're delivering buggy software products, you know, that might be something you want to correct. It might be you're you know, making some equipment and it's not quite what a customer wants. It's well built, but it's not quite what a customer wants. This is why you've got to start there before you try and work out what Agile's actually going to do to help you. Right, now what we're going to do is run a poll, and I'm just going to put my heart in my mouth, because with all the new software going on here, we're going to run a poll, and I want to know from everyone on the webinar what exactly you're trying to achieve with your Agile. So if you have a look at the poll, and you can pick as many of those as you want. And one of the things people like about these polls is they can look at what everybody else is saying. So off you go. I'll give you another 10 or 20 seconds. Okay, over 3/4 of you have now voted, which is really good. And so we've got just wait for one more. Okay, so if you have a look at the results there, and remember one of the things to look at is where do you sit with other people, because we got 56% there saying faster delivery. We've got 83% delivering what the customer really wants. Now those that are used to our webinars, remember we call that the Spice Girls rule, trying to work out what the customer really, really wants. 37% saying they're building a better product technically. I would expect a big difference there between what the customer wants and it's technically sound. And you know, quite a small amount reducing costs there. And that's quite an interesting one, the costs one. In all the things I do and in all my travels, you know, money doesn't seem to be that big an issue. It is an issue, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-alls seem to be hitting exactly what the customer needs and things like hitting deadlines, okay? Now, there's 9% there that have said something else, and I'm going to come on to that as we have a look at it. But as I say, can you see that not every organisation is different? And if you're trying to deliver a more accurate solution for your customer, you might behave differently than if actually you're trying to go for quicker delivery. So different agile disciplines, for example, like time boxing, or employing something like a business analyst or a requirements engineer, it might your focus or your priorities. I'm not saying you act completely differently depending on which one of those is important, but what I'm saying is they are not the same. And it's quite possible that you can go faster and your defect rates go up. So you've got to be very clear what you're trying to achieve, because you're going to need chip into this. You're going to need someone to agree that that is what you're trying to you are trying to achieve. Okay, so we talked there about different sort of levels, but remember 9% of you said it might be something else. So when you say, oh, I want to be closer to what the customer wants, it might be that you want to do something slightly different. So some of the people on the webinar might actually be interested in being more responsive. So in other words, they want to be able to react quickly to changing market conditions or changing demands from the customer. Now, you could say that's similar to giving the customer what they want, but sometimes you know what they want, you just can't get it there. So this is where something like being faster is different to being more responsive, which is different to the idea of giving the customer exactly what they want. We talked about things being better earlier on, but in the survey that we just did, you can see that there's a difference between building the right thing, which is what most people are trying to go for with the customer, and building the thing right, which means it's technically sound. It's quite important to see the difference between building, if you like, a lead balloon, which is no use to anyone, but even though you can build it perfectly, it's not going to help anybody. And another point there is, do you actually mean faster, or do you actually mean on time? Do you mean timely? So if you're working to release, I don't know, let's say you're doing a report or a periodical, hitting that deadline, is it better that you hit that deadline in a much more controlled way? Or do you actually want to deliver some sort of book or brochure much more quickly, a month earlier than you normally do? But these are different. Speed is different to timeliness, in the sense that if you take the example of the Olympics, say if you take the 2012 Olympics in London, that had to be on time. There was no question there. But if you also take another great big British sort of sporting venue, which is Wembley Stadium, that was 18 months late. Is that still a success? Or take the Millennium Bridge that missed the Millennium. This is where you've got to be very careful what you're trying to achieve. Faster is not exactly the same as on time, and as I say, building the right thing isn't the same as building the thing right. Now remember, going back to what I said earlier, you've really got to pick one or maybe two of these. You can't pick 5 or 6, because each one affects the other, and you've got to work out what it is you're trying to solve with Agile, and you've got to get that right up there on the headlines. Now this is why I mentioned the sort of upstairs downstairs type philosophy in terms of the difference here, because if we talk about delivering a more accurate solution to the customer or being a bit quicker with how we deliver, are we actually measuring Agile, or are we measuring something else? Now I don't like to sort of sit on the fence here. I like to be, quite decisive when I'm giving you guys advice on these webinars, but it's a little bit yes and no. There is a clear distinction between, if you like, bottom line benefits and how Agile works, and I'll try and draw those two distinctions for you. But there is a twilight zone. There is an overlap because one directly affects the other. But the one thing I want you to try and separate to start with, just in terms of your mindset, is measuring things at two different levels. Now, the one is what I call the benefit level. So if your project comes in on time, if you're running a project or you're delivering a new product, is it making these savings? Is it making the revenue you need? This is very much what I call benefit. Another word you might want to use for that would be value, for example, very much a sort of word. But measuring whether Agile works is actually, some of it is there, but some of it is actually completely different. So, for example, how is collaboration going? This isn't something you can directly measure in terms of benefits, because what I want you to sort of tease out here or play around with is the thought that you could have very, very bad Agile going on, but benefits are coming through and everybody's very happy. I think you'll find, your CFO or your financial director in a happy place if that's the case. Whereas if your Agile's going really well, but the benefits aren't coming through, as I say, these are two different things and we need to look at them. I'll talk about the overlap in a moment because it isn't black and white, but firstly I want you to be very clear that there's two different things going on here. And separating the two will, if you like, help provide, a little bit of clarity. So in terms of measuring the benefits, the output, if you like, it's certainly the most important thing. You need to be focusing on end result, whatever you're working on. And generally, you can make that objective. So in other words, if something is trying to save 5% cost savings, or you're trying to deliver by a certain deadline, you can normally measure that with a sort of in an objective way. But you should be doing that anyway. That should be what you're already doing. Now, the Agile word that gets used, it's, if you like, just about synonymous with benefits, is the word value. People talk about value stream, value driven, delivering value to the customer. But I've been doing this a long time, and if any of you feel a little bit, I don't know, if you want to ask a question at a conference or anything, just put your hand up and say to someone, what do you mean by value? You often get a reply that's something like, well, it's sort of things of value, which isn't really a sort of very useful answer. Give you an interesting example of one organisation I was dealing with in the media was looking very much at putting up content onto their news website, and they were looking at hits coming in, and they were measuring value in terms of visitors and hits. Now, if they want to measure, value that way, that's absolutely fine, and that's not cryptically saying it's wrong. It's just that's the value they were measuring. But if these people were coming to the website and not buying anything or not clicking on an advert, there was no benefit there. So you've got to be very careful as to where you're pitching this. If you take something like Prince2, Prince2 is very good at sort of separating out the output or product, the outcome, as in what it achieves, and the actual benefit that comes from that. So an output might be, if I use an IT example, a website, the outcome might be more visitors coming in, the benefit might be they spend 10% more in terms of buying things than they did on other channels. But what are you measuring? These are all different, and you've got to make sure that you know what you're sort of looking at there. Now, in terms of measuring Agile, so remember I sort of mentioned this sort of upstairs, downstairs. If we want to measure Agile, because we know Agile's good, it's helping us, therefore we want to get it to work, we need to be able to measure Agile. So although I've said the importance is always the end result, the end game, I'm not saying, hey, don't worry about Agile, because you've got to measure that as well. And sometimes, as I say, they blur and they link in. So let me give you some sort of examples about how to measure things, because it's very important, it's subjective. One thing you can do, and I work for a couple of big banks, and I remember on one project I was helping, we were going Agile, and a major problem occurred within about 4 weeks of the project because we decided to deliver something quickly in terms of a very aggressive first sort of increment or a first release. things went incredibly badly wrong. And there was a lot of people sort of staring at the floor. It wasn't a good day at the office. But the truth was, by working in the Agile way, we had caught something incredibly early. And I just remember someone in the meeting there, it was a little bit doom and gloom, but somebody just said, hey, do you know something? Under our old way of working, we wouldn't have spotted this for 3 months. And everyone sort of then, their eyes lit up. Now, how do you measure that? You know that's a success. You know that you can sit there and say, hey, this is good news. But can you put a number on it? That's a lot harder. So measuring Agile, as I say, it's very hard to do. And it might be secondary importance because it's an enabler, but it is vital to measure it. You have to measure it. And again, I'll be a lot clearer about why later on in the webinar. Now, some ideas of what to measure, and this is trying to say if you're trying to measure Agile, because remember there's measuring Agile success and there's measuring how successful you are with your Agile. Some ideas that I'd just like to run past you that you might have a little think about are things like this. So collaboration, for example. How on earth do you measure that? Now, if a team's working well together, it should be quite productive, it should help, and it therefore, even if it's subjective out of 10, you could sit there and go, what do we all think our collaboration level is? Sometimes they're called, the happy charts, or how are we feeling? How do you feel collaboration is going? But remember, you can have a pretty uncollaborative team and still the benefits are coming in. Okay, Agile's not working so well, but obviously the thing that you're doing, for example, the business case or the idea, looks like it's working pretty well. Now, I've worked with highly collaborative teams, phenomenally collaborative teams that are brilliant, and they've actually delivered nonsense at the end of the project, and it just hasn't worked. So this is why we've got to separate these measures, and you've got to measure them both, because hopefully the more we collaborate, hopefully the other success sliders that you're measuring go in the right direction. But as I say, you can't guarantee it. It's a bit like the example I used earlier of the children playing with the the game devices. Another major Agile concept is transparency, putting things on the wall, openness, trust. How on earth do you measure that? Again, have a go, try something. So, for example, literally marking on a scale from 0 to 10, very subjective, but how transparent do we think we are on the project? Keep a running total of it and see how it goes. Now, there are issues here. You've got to be careful. Some people might be a little bit reluctant to say how happy or unhappy they are feeling. You've got to be very careful here. It's not something you necessarily would stick on the wall unless everyone is in agreement with that. I've heard the term emotional seismograph used before. Someone who's very well known in the UK, Rachel Davis, I don't know whether it's her term or she borrowed it from someone, but it's certainly a nice term to almost put a great big seismograph chart on to show how happy people are, the transparency, the collaboration, all built into that, so that you can get a feel for how the project's going. And they're normally really quite funny to look at. Everything goes up and then there's a release and it comes crashing down and builds up and goes down. But again, everybody's got to buy into that sort of way of working. So some ideas of what to measure: collaboration, transparency, self-organization. Some of these top 5 are all the sort of Prince 2 Agile behaviors, but it doesn't matter what Agile approach you use. There could be something like, collaboration and communication are used in a lot of methods. Trust, honesty, it's those sort of things. But how do you measure self-organization? And as I say, have a go, try something, and it might be that as a Scrum Master or Team Leader or Project Manager, you combine those results and work out what is actually going on. Now, remember, if self-organisation is working well and we're transparent and we're collaborative, the end result should pop out the other end of the, if you like, the process in more accurate product. They sell more, and the customers are happier sort of bunny, if you like. But as I say, that is the end result. What you've got to work out is what am I playing around with on my project? So for example, if you've got more transparent and put more things on the wall, how are you going to tell whether that affects something down the line that actually gets you some greater, sort of better results? Things like morale is quite an interesting one. Again, that's where I'm saying, the happy sheets are quite useful, but be careful. If somebody's got some deep-seated problems and they're going to have to say, well, I'm a 3 today, are they going to tell you the truth, or are they going to just play it a little bit economical? A couple of other thoughts for you to think about. One is release frequency. Again, 9% said, something else they were talking about. This idea of release frequency, is that actually what you're trying to do? You're used to releasing something every 6 months, and you want to get it to every 3 months. You want to get it to every 1 month. That might be a target, but again, it might be that it causes more problems. It's harder to support something that you're releasing quite frequently. It confuses the customer. Alternatively, it doesn't confuse the customer. It makes it much more easier to take on. Early detection of problems is what I talked about earlier with the situation I gave you when we were at the bank. And just simple things like bugs, counting bugs. But now do we move over sort of upstairs, if you like, to, this is the technical build thing. This is where I'm saying there's often, the better you get your Agile and the closer you get to sort of frequent delivery and you can track value, these things start to merge together, because you can see the cause and effect of what you're doing that then results in value. But like I say, you have to look at your own context. The example I gave you about the newspaper and their website, they were just looking at visitors, at hits. They would try something. Hey, we got another 4,000 hits on that. That's working. They could measure it this way, and they were happy. So if you're working on a website and you can put a page up and take a page down, and it's IT, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But what if you're building something like a car? And a release schedule happens every 3 or 6 months. How do you do the same sort of experimentation with that? You can't just put out a few cars and see what people do with it, and bring them back in if it's not quite right. So speaks the owner of a Volkswagen, but we won't go there. So bottom line, don't forget the CFO view, the Chief Financial Officer or the Financial Director. What I always say to people when we're talking about Agile success, and again, this is one of the things I'd like you to really home in on, is that if you met your CFO in the corridor and you're in charge of an Agile transformation, or you're a Scrum Master, or you're working on Agile, you're part of the Agile team, you're part of the Agile wave at your company, and if you're passing the CFO in the corridor and they say to you, how are things going? And if you say, hey, everybody's loving it, it's great, it's going pretty well, that isn't what the CFO wants to hear. The CFO wants to hear there's some bottom line improvement. They want to hear that it's quicker, it's cheaper, it's we're selling more. That's where I'm saying don't ever forget the sort of the CFO view. And this is why you've got to look at these two things differently. That we've got to get Agile to work, but we've got to get the end result. We've got to get the end result as well. So are we talking happy campers or sort of hard-nosed cash? And if you've got a bunch of people in your Agile department that look like that bunch on the sort of screen there, go careful, because they obviously don't know all the facts. So measuring, we talked about measuring, and now we come on to the next problem. And I don't know whether you're on the webinar to be educated, go away from this thinking this is great, because I know I'm making this quite hard, and it's going to get even harder. Because one of the biggest problems that you've actually got with this idea of what do I measure and the two different things I'm talking about is, if you are going to do this, you've got to come up with something called a baseline. You've got to work out where you are now. So I've just said how hard it is to establish measures. Well, yes, it's hard, and also you've actually got to come up with some now so that you can check them in 12 months or 24 months time to see whether you've made any difference. And again, with all the visits and all the places I go, we try to get people to do this as much as possible. But, I'd say, to be honest, the majority of the time people go, yeah, and they don't do it. So setting some sort of baseline is actually something that you need to do straight away. So what measures do you have right now that you can then compare? So you're doing, I don't know, you're having certain defect rates, for example. You're having a certain number of calls coming into your customer support center. You've got some numbers. So play around with Agile and then see if those numbers go a different way. But finding your baseline is essential. Remember Tom DeMarco, you can't control what you're not measuring. Therefore, I have to measure things, but you need to know where you are. I was reading something the other day about what I think is called RHR, it stands for resting heart rate or something like that. And in order to work out whether you're getting fitter, it's a pretty good measure. So first thing in the morning, maybe over 2 or 3 mornings, take your pulse and see how many heartbeats you have in a minute, and that's called your resting heart rate, and it's quite a good indication of how fit you are or how healthy you are. Now it depends on various factors. So, and I'm not qualified to say this, I'm not a doctor, but the bottom line is something around 60 to 80 is okay. Now, if you're go on a fitness campaign for 6 months and then start measuring your heart rate and you find that you're, I don't know, 78, unless you know where you started from, you don't know anything. That hasn't actually told you anything. So if you're previously 68 and you've gone up to 78, that's not actually good news. Again, if you're 85, does that mean, hey, it's not working? But if you come down from 95, then maybe it is working. So what measures have you got right now? You have to set a load of measures now, then you've got to measure or decide what you're measuring, and then look at it in 12 months' time and see whether anything is making a difference. But again, are they the ones you need? So remember the survey we did earlier on the poll there. If you're trying to build better technical products, are you differentiating the calls coming into the support center? Are they, oh, I want something that does this, or I want something that does that, or why doesn't it do this? That is a different question to my screen's just frozen. My screen hasn't frozen, not yet, but what I'm saying is if someone's calling in with that, that's a technical issue, that's a technical problem. Can you separate those two out in order to check your target against what you're trying to measure? So can you, as I say, tell if Agile's working? Do you know what success looks like? It's a great line, I use it all the time. How will you know you've got there? How will you know you succeeded? And it's hard to do, I'm afraid, but the more you attack it, the more benefit you'll get, the more in control you'll be, and the more focus you'll have. Okay, pop quiz. We get a few people that quite like the pop quizzes, so here's your pop quiz for today. Talking about baseline, we've got a very good basis there, playing a baseline. If you could just pop into the question box or the chat box what famous group that guy played for, and we'll give you a name check if you get it right, okay? One of my favorite groups. So, in order to go Agile, and here's another sort of factor there, you need a business case. Now, this is where when 8% of people on the webinar are saying, yeah, we know what success looks like, really you can only tell what success looks like if you've actually got a business case so you can measure it. So this Agile and measuring success, you need a business case, because if you're investing in Agile, you kind of need to know what the upside is in order to work out whether it's worth investing. Okay? Now, going to have a little go at a poll, and most of you are getting that question right. It's not Sex Pistols. Come on, get serious. Right, let's have a little look at another poll, and I want to check what your sort of level in terms of your investment here, in terms of what you're spending on your Agile. And I'll explain why in a moment. So up comes the poll. There's only one choice on this one. Oh, but this sounds quite good. So over half of you have voted now. Right, I'm just getting up over 2/3. So let's have a look and see what's come up here. So here's a second poll, and I've used euro. Actually, I should have given you currency conversion there. Euro is pretty near to $1, and oh, that's made it quite hard, I guess, isn't it? I should have told you a little bit about that beforehand. But there's a lot of people around the world. I don't know if you in Kuwait and you know what a euro is, but let's move on. It gives you a rough order of magnitude, so I'm sure this is still going to work. But 40% of you, 41% of you, actually spending less than 10,000 euro. Which is, probably less than, I don't know, 7.5k sterling, less than approximately $10,000. So most people on the webinar here are spending that sort of level. 16% between 10,000 and 25,000. 18%, 25,000 to 100,000. Again, it depends on the size of your organisation, sort of obviously, but what is the level of rollout here? A quarter of people are spending more than 100,000, okay? Now, if you're spending any amount of money, and this is where if you're spending more than 100,000, what are you expecting to get back from it? Because obviously you're going to need to get a lot more than your 100,000 back, and this is why when you write a business case, you're going to need to tell the people that are signing it off what you're going to get from Agile and sort of why. And this is why you can't just say, oh, I think it's a good idea. I remember talking to one person a long time ago who had to justify an agile transition. This is going back quite a long way, and I remember how difficult it was, and there was lots of problems and lots of lots of problems they couldn't quite solve, and he came up with a solution to just say, if it just saves 1% from all project cost, then it's worth us investing 100, 200k. But it is quite difficult to, as I say, but if you're going to get some finance, and some of those numbers are quite big. And one thing I will say to those in the 41%, if you're spending less than sort of 5, 6, 7 grand on your agile, how much are you going to save? And should you really be looking at something a little bit more serious there? But it all depends on your own situation. So in terms of how much you're investing in agile, how much you're expecting in return, what is the scope of your agile? Are you just using one department? Is it just an IT thing? Remember, at Agile KRC, we spend a lot of time with just agile in an IT area, but also a lot of time that's agile, that's, if you like, more product focused and company wide or business focused, with some IT in it, and maybe without IT in it. We've got a couple of customers who are sort of big marketing companies, and they just don't talk or think in IT, but they're very, very agile in the way they work. But what is the scope of your agile? This is where you need to be clear, because your business case is going to relate to it. What are you expecting to get in return? Now, just to draw a few things to a close here, I've got a couple more slides that I just want to add to this. We've talked about different types of measure, what's the end point, where's the starting point. A couple of other things you need to have in place is you need to actually have the people that can make this happen. So who's actually sponsoring this? Who's actually managing it? Have you got a team of people rolling out Agile, coaches? Something like a PMO, a project management office. A lot of people don't like the PMO. It doesn't sound an Agile thing, but to me, I think it's the epicenter of a good Agile transition. They're the guardians of the process. But who is sponsoring it? Who's handing over, 10K, 100K, maybe 1,000,000K? Who's handing it over? Because you can't run this sort of stuff as what I'm calling edge of desk. Many customers I dealt with, and I often end up pleading with them, is if you're going Agile, don't do it last thing on a Friday. It can't be an edge of desk option. Namely, I'll do that when I get round to it. As I say, if you're investing the sort of sums you're investing, you're trying to get the results you're trying to get, you need to put this, in the center of your thoughts. Someone needs to manage it. Even a team of people need to champion it. And equally, the sponsor's got to be very clear what they are getting. But remember, they're not looking to get a happy department. They're looking to get happy customers. They're looking to get quicker to market. This is the sort of thing that you've got to separate these two out. Agile will get you there, but you need to know where the destination is, and you need to track those sort of Agile techniques, behaviors, and that sort of stuff. Now, another thing I've got to tell you, and hopefully I've not put you off too much, but this is a very, very hard area. How to run a stand-up is quite easy. How to do Moscow is relatively easy. This sort of stuff is some of the hardest things in Agile. It's a long journey. It's never going to end, because it's almost like continuous improvement. As you play around with Agile techniques, you play around with tools, ideas, concepts, you start to try and move these sliders so it's never ending. This is where things like Lean Startup and Kanban, they keep talking about, the shorter you can make these feedback loops, the more you can get to see what the benefits are. But again, it's a question of measuring it. Just a quick one is measuring sort of user involvement on a project. Compare user involvement on 5 projects you've got and see what came out the other end. Interestingly enough, you might find if there was little user involvement, the project actually went quite quick or quite quickly. That's because you built something that seemed right, but you almost certain didn't get the sort of very good customer feedback at the end. Now, don't worry if some of this worries you, because when the going gets tough, the tough get going, as the saying is, because there's very low levels of maturity across the industry. I'm gobsmacked quite often with what I see. This is why those people on the webinar, the 8% who've got success criteria, well done to you. That is a brilliant place to be. But remember, that's less than 1 in 10. But equally, those people who are, I've forgotten the figure now, was it around about 40% in terms of saying, actually I did forget the figure, no, it was more or less sort of 78% were actually saying, well, we sort of got it, you know, that's not a good place. Try and improve that as much as you can. Now, we're not going to do this in the question box, but have a guess what that car is. Only because I saw how many people have responded to the previous one. When Claire gets back on the line, she might have a few words for me, I don't know. But some things are easier than others. As I say, organisation by organisation, look at your own situation. I always use the example of a newspaper, a media company. It's actually easy for them to do certain things because they can get the interaction really quickly on a daily basis. But as I say, and the car is a Honda Civic, and the reason it's there is because the Japanese over decades have just made small improvements all the time and have ended up, and if you take someone like Honda, it depends what survey you look at, but I think they're the highest quality performing car manufacturer, I don't know, for something like 7 years in a row. But they didn't get there with a great big idea. They got there with continuous improvement over many years, many months and many weeks, little by little, and that's what you need to do. But if you can't measure it, you can't see what the effects that's actually happening. Right, I'm now going to go to back to Claire. She's going to talk about one slide just to give you some further information, and I'm going to start looking at the questions and see how many I can answer, and we will go on till 1:30. So Claire, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Keith. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that Keith is going to be teaching a couple of our public courses, which is a rarity. So if anybody wanted to do their Prince 2 Agile Practitioner, Keith will be teaching that for us in London on the 24th of November and then again on the 21st of December. We run regular public courses. You can find all those on the website agileKRC.com and click on public courses. It says there that we run regular webinars. They're not as regular as we would like them to be, as they maybe once were, but it very much goes on Keith's availability. If you've got any suggestions about the sort of things that you'd like to see us run webinars on, then do let us know and we will take those suggestions on board. There's all sorts of information there about what we do at Agile KRC. Keith mentioned that at the beginning, so I won't go through it again. Do connect with us. You can connect with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Just look for Agile KRC. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to hear more from Keith, you can check out his blog. So we've got quite a few questions coming in now. We're going to take as many as we can. As I mentioned earlier, if we don't get to your question, we do type up the answers and we do put them on the website. So check that out after the webinar. So I'm going to pass you back to Keith and we'll start taking your questions.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'll work better when I'm off mute. Some really good questions coming in, so thank you very much for that. So I'm going to have a look at these questions for you and give you the best answers I can. So we've got a question here from John, and it says, whilst data and metrics are important, you can get lost in it and it can become very demotivating for the team. How do you avoid this? I think that's a fair point, and I think when you start just getting obsessed with the numbers, humans work on projects. Collaboration is a very human thing. Just chasing the numbers all the time, it can become very sterile, and I'd agree with you. It can be quite demotivating. Therefore, I think you need to pick the right balance, and this is why I'm saying, what are you measuring? If you're measuring 40, 50 things, you're just going to get hit with a dashboard of numbers. What I would try to do is measure a few key things and keep it simple. I would also try and keep it low tech. If you can have it on the wall and there's just a line and it's going up or it's going down, then people can see it, but it has to be a credible indicator that everyone sort of looks at. I mean, even in sort of things like the government, or governments look at things like feel-good factor, or the inflation rate or unemployment. I would keep it simple. I would pick 2 or 3 big figures and make sure they're pertinent, because remember, measures affect behaviours. The classic in the NHS was when waiting times went down, but that's just because somebody had seen them and then they sat in a waiting room for 3 or 4 hours. So pick the right measures, keep it simple, don't pick too many, get agreement to them, and I'd get them transparent and get them up on the wall. But I think the point you're making there, John, I would agree with. Nadia's given me a question about ISFs, instrumental success factors, which comes from the DSTM Agile PM method. And I'd say in terms of the role of those ISFs, which is, things like the capability of the team and such like, they are an example of these Agile enabler type things you might want to track, like collaboration. So looking at tooling, you might want to look at the tools you've got, you then make some changes, is it moving anything in the right direction? So the ISFs, I would say, are suitable for using, if you remember the screen that I talked about, collaboration, communication, transparency, the ISFs could go on there as another set of things that you might find quite useful. Remy has said balanced scorecards can measure staff emotion, turnover, mobility, training quests, and in a sense, I didn't mention the word scorecard or balanced scorecard, and this goes back to the question from John as well. If you could create a very simple scorecard, yep, some are going to go up, and it'd be quite good to show how happy is going up and actually revenue is going down. It might be a very good way of saying things. But remember the previous point, you can overkill this. Certainly one of the customers I work with at the moment, they're very much into these scorecards, and they're very colourful, and they're all over every office. And we're talking about a big worldwide company here, and they're everywhere. Everyone can see, which sliders are going in which direction. So I think, Remy, I agree with your point there. I've got a question from Nadej, and it says, would you say there's a difference between collaboration and communication is about what is within and without the Agile team, if you like, inside and outside? I wouldn't, to be honest. I think that collaboration is one thing, and I think that communication is another. They're similar, but they're not the same thing. I've worked with highly collaborative teams that are really bad at communication, and I've worked with really good communication that's actually very adversarial, so they are different. I certainly remember one big thing from working offshore, sort of UK, India, USA, that type of situation. I do remember thinking that everyone thinks this is an issue, but actually the biggest single thing was collaboration. Are the UK guys really helping the Indian guys or not, or have we got a little bit of turf wars going on? But again, collaboration could be inside the teams, so it might be there's pretty good collaboration between the continents. It's just that within the team, it's not working very well. So personally, I would measure those differently. I would treat them and manage them differently. Collaboration, communication. They sound similar, and most people sort of go down that route, but they do result in different things. Philippe is saying, you're essentially recommending to measure the process. This needs to be combined with measuring the outcome, brackets benefit, which I agree, so at least correlations can be made. Why not use lean techniques and measure waste? So if we're talking about things like Lean Six Sigma, lean techniques, value flows, we're talking top end, maybe that 8% that are saying, hey, we've got this and we've got that. Maybe they are playing around with those things, but it's a bit like learning to ice skate. Go forwards and then go backwards before you start doing sort of somersaults. This is so, Philippe, your point I totally agree with. Lean engineering, measuring, that sort of approach. As I say, Lean Six Sigma, those sort of areas. Yeah, very much go for that. Very much process stuff. But again, how you're measuring collaboration, it's a different sort of thing which you can factor everything in. But that is what I'd say is extremely advanced, and certainly the feedback I'm getting from the polls and the registration is that is top end. And if you're into that and you're playing with that, good luck to you. You're in a good place. That is where you need to be. What else have we got here now? I've got a good question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it. Gabrielle, what is the role of the enterprise architect in Agile, and how would you measure its contribution? I think that's a good example. How do you measure someone's role or someone's input? I think what you're touching on there, because it's difficult to answer, is some things like architecture are very what I call context specific. So there are times when you need quite robust architecture that's going to last 10, 15 years. And there are other times when actually you want architecture that you can build up and strip down quite quickly. So measuring how, adaptable an architecture is would be where I would go. So, for example, if you're trying to do something and then something new comes up on an iPhone and you realize you want to do this and make it cloud-based, then how quickly can you strip your architecture down and build it back up? There's some fascinating stuff in Agile about emergent architecture, maybe very much in the, if you like, the IT domain, this idea of being very adaptable from an architectural point of view, but your ability to do that is quite important and needs to be measured, as is things like maintainability, cost of ownership, portability, usability. Again, usability is quite a good example. Again, doesn't need to be IT, it could be anything, but when somebody can pick up a product, I've just bought a speaker recently from China for my iPhone, and because when I was out in China, they showed me the speaker. It's absolutely brilliant, but I can't get it to work because the instructions are in Chinese and it's not that intuitive to me. I'm not a numpty, but can I get this to work? No chance. So this idea about how intuitive something is, again, it's another sort of measure. So measuring an individual's performance, quite difficult. That's quite a high level of precision you would need there, which goes back to the earlier comment about some of the sort of lean engineering things. Right, what else have we got here? I'm going to try. It would help if the questions were short. So, Sharif, I might have a go at yours in a minute. I'm going to go to Ian here and see if I can. I'm reading this on the fly. So, FYI, for your information, I have seen one group measure their velocity, and when it flatlined, they reviewed their Agile approach and chose a better process for the new requirements. This was a good use of measurement. I broadly agree. Again, not knowing quite what happens when a line is flatlining, sounds bad. The thing you've got to work out is it bad? Why is it flatlining? The fact you've got something flatlining, meaning it's staying stable, means you're measuring something and you've got some information. But just remember, flatlining, could be disastrous, meaning nothing's getting done, or it could be that actually we are working at a pretty good pace. It's just that there's more stuff coming in than we're getting through. So you've got to be very careful what you sort of measure here. But I think if something suddenly quickly came up and started going amber, started going red, and you quickly responded to it, then you're playing with your Agile technique and you're making your situation a better situation. And I think that's what you need to get to. The great thing would be, did it come out on the bottom line? So did the change then mean we sold 4 more products that month as opposed to the usual sort of thing? Now we're getting very close to the end, so I'm really sorry I couldn't get to every question. Did the best we could. Really liked some of the questions there. That was brilliant. So what we will do now is actually finish. What we're going to do, if I can click on the right button now. What we're going to do is tape record the whole webinar. We're going to put it up on the website. So as Claire said, the transcript, this audio without the video, will be on the website at some point in the next 24, 48 hours. This will be under videos and webinars on the website. The slides are already up there under presentations. It's been great fun. We've done a slightly different one here, and I warned you up front, it was a little bit harder than sort of normal because there's a lot of what if here. It is nebulous, it is a bit woolly, because sometimes, like I said, with the 5 fruit and veg a day, it's a good idea, but how can I actually tell? And the same with getting yourself fit as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for turning up. We love the feedback we get from everybody. Certainly one of the best times is when we go to conferences. We get so many people coming up and they're always complimentary. That doesn't mean to say we can't learn, so any feedback you want to give us, please fill in the survey when we finish the webinar. But that's all for the webinar today. Thank you very much for attending.
Just before everybody leaves, we've just had something in the question box reminding us that you didn't give them the name of the band from your pop quiz earlier.
That wouldn't be the first time. The band is one of my favourites of all time. The band, which a lot of you got actually, was The Jam. So going back to my punk era. Thanks for watching, and Claire, thanks for interrupting me. But have a great end of your week and a great weekend. Bye for now.